Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Here's our game plan for today. We're going to finish up taking notes on the different psychological disorders and identifying their symptoms. So that way you will be ready to play a little armchair psychologist and go on to Mod 8.3 and do some diagnosis scenarios where you're using the DSM and your understanding of the symptoms to try and make an accurate diagnosis for each person that you're looking at. So we left off, I believe, midway through somatic symptom disorders. Remember, soma means body. So we're looking at ones where there's kind of physical bodily symptoms rather than psychological. Okay, so I believe we left off talking about somatic symptom disorder. So let's just quickly review. We said conversion disorder is when you have a mental illness and it's basically converting into physical symptoms. So the reason you're having your physical symptoms isn't because of something wrong with the physical part of your body. It is something that is psychological, that is a mental illness that is now manifesting and converting into physical symptoms such as being paralyzed, losing your senses, and maybe even having a seizure. Illness anxiety disorder is just that concern, what used to be hypochondria, they called it. So just anxiety about becoming seriously ill. You could have symptoms, but it's in this case, it's unlikely that you do. It's typically that you're physically fine, and you just have this crippling anxiety about becoming sick. So that's the key thing to note. You might have symptoms, but it's unlikely that you do. You're probably just fine and healthy. It's just the fear of getting sick that's important. Now, somatic symptom disorder happens when you have actual symptoms. So this is when you have actual physical symptoms. So maybe you have pain or nausea or stomach ache or something like that. But the key thing here is that you have extreme, excessive, irrational worry over your symptoms. So it's yes, you have these symptoms, but again, things like headache, stomach ache are regular things that people typically experience. So where this becomes pathological and problematic is that you are exhibiting extreme worry over these things that typically would not need this type of worry. So right, you're gonna have a stomach ache and be like, oh my gosh, like I have an ulcer or like something like this, right? So that's the key thing here, and that's the difference between illness anxiety disorder is with illness anxiety disorder, it's just generally you are worried about becoming sick. Again, probably not having symptoms. Somatic symptom, you can remember symptom, is that you actually have physical symptoms and you're just having extreme worry about those. And then finally, our last one, this is one that we probably see in the media a lot, is factitious disorder. Factitious, you can think fact, fake. So it's fake symptoms. So this is when someone is actually faking their illness. They don't actually have this illness that they're claiming that they do. So, they're saying they have cancer, they're saying they have XYZ thing. It's not true. So they're faking their symptoms. And it's not really sure exactly why. But you can prove this, right? You can do a scan, you can take a test and prove that the individual does not have this. But people with factitious disorders, this is kind of a larger category, there's different ones, but typically they're going to put a lot of time and effort into researching their disease to become so knowledgeable to the point where they can really, do a realistic portrayal of the disease and its symptoms. So we have some where maybe you're faking psychological symptoms, others where maybe you're faking physical illness symptoms, and others where you are, so when you're faking physical illness symptoms, that's called Munchausen syndrome. And then we often heard of the case of Gypsy Rose, where her mom pretended that she had all these different illnesses, and that is Munchausen's by proxy. So that's when another individual is putting all these symptoms and fake disorders onto another person. So that's factitious disorder, right? Fact, fake. So last ones we're going to look at are feeding and eating disorders as a general category, and then personality disorders. So We often are familiar with some of these in the media. So anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa are kind of ones that we typically hear of. Anorexia is that preoccupation with gaining weight, that fear of gaining weight, and having that body dysmorphia. So symptoms, starvation diet, not eating, just obsessive fear of gaining weight, often despite being underweight. And again, that body dysmorphia, meaning that you are not accurately seeing what your body looks like, right? You're looking in the mirror and you're seeing something different than what's actually there. And not always, but sometimes it's going to be accompanied by excessive exercise. Now, bulimia is you're engaging. Well, first I'll go over binge eating disorder. So, binge eating disorder is where you engage in like a bout or a period of excessive overeating. And then this is going to be followed by feelings of disgust and guilt and, just overall feeling guilty about engaging in that binging episode. But the key thing here with binge eating disorder is it's not followed by purging, which is like throwing up or taking laxatives to get rid of what you just ate. And it's not followed by exercising or fasting, which is what you'd see with anorexia. So it's just the binge eating and then the feeling of guilt after. Now, bulimia is when you're engaging in the binge eating. So you just ate a bunch, and then again, because you feel guilty, this is followed by inappropriate behavior to try and lose the weight of what you just ate. So this could be, again, inducing vomiting in yourself, taking laxatives, or excessive exercise, things like that. So that's the difference between those three. There's other eating disorders and things we haven't talked about. There's PICA, like PICA, which is an interesting one people could do for their psych disorder project later on if you're interested. That's where you're eating things that typically are not like edible or things that you would eat. So other ones in addition to these main three. All right, so these are probably some of the most misunderstood and ones that bring us curiosity and questions. So we're going to talk about personality disorders. So key thing here, enduring, so long-lasting pattern of behavior that's very different than what is in the cultural norm and often leads to problems and distress or just making it difficult to function in life. So there's three different clusters. There's cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C personality disorders. And then we're going to talk, there's tons and tons and tons of personality disorders, but we're going to talk about the main ones within each category. So just generally, cluster A personality disorders, this causes disruption in relationships, mainly because you're engaging in just odd or different, eccentric behaviors. Cluster B are when you're engaging in really like reckless and impulsive behaviors and emotions are really flying high. But yeah, kind of very reckless, dramatic, and impulsive. And then cluster C has to do with anxiety. So let's get into cluster A. There is a lot of these have to do with like schizophrenia type symptoms because again, it's very eccentric, very odd and peculiar behaviors that you might see with someone with schizophrenia who's having those like delusions and things. So first one is schizoid personality disorder. And this is when you are detaching from your social relationships and you are just not very good at expressing emotions. You might have that flat affect or kind of lack of emotion where you're just not feeling very much of anything, right? You're not overly happy, you're not sad, you're just very like flat and neutral. But again, your key thing, you're detaching and withdrawing from social relationships. Schizotypal, is this is where you are like you don't like relationships, you feel discomfort in them, and just don't enjoy having relationships with other people. So you're going to be very distant. You also see things like odd or peculiar speech, and again, lack of emotion. Then we have paranoid, which is just, again, you see this is similar to some schizophrenia. So you're going to be distrusting of others. You're going to be suspicious, think that people are going to do you harm, that they're out to get you. Um, so there's your three. You can see how they're similar to schizophrenia, but not so much the delusions and hallucinations, but again, kind of that some of those ideas of like eccentricities and like paranoia. So now cluster B, these are the ones where you're being very kind of like impulsive and dramatic. So we have antisocial personality disorder. When people say things like sociopath, that's not like a genuine like thing, but this is kind of close to, I guess, what people sometimes mean by that. Because this is where you genuinely just have this lack of remorse. So you're engaging in these behaviors that are hurting others, and you just don't necessarily understand that it's bad. You don't, you're hurting others and you don't really care because you have this lack of remorse and empathy for what's going on. So again, disregard for the violation of rights of others. So again, this is just, you are hurting others, whether it be physically, mentally, etc., and just not feeling that remorse or empathy because of this. Borderline personality disorder is when you're engaging in like really risky behavior. So this is that lack of impulse control, and that you're engaging in dramatic, erratic behaviors, really just extreme risk-taking behaviors. So law breaking, gambling, etc. And again, just really impulsive is the key one for borderline personality disorder. And sometimes this might even like engage in like self-harm or like things like that. So whether it's breaking the law or even like hurting yourself, that's borderline personality disorder. And that it's dramatic. Sometimes you're doing this to get attention. So yeah, you have the drama and the impulse control there. Histrionic, this is when we're looking at like neuroticism and like emotional swings and things like that. So this is excessive emotionality, and again wanting to be the center of attention. So you're very emotional, like emotions are flying, very much attention seeking, and you're doing this through socially inappropriate behaviors, right? So you're doing things that are not what you should be doing. They're atypical, deviating from the norm, might be making people uncomfortable or just not socially acceptable. And you're doing this again to be the center of attention. Narcissistic personality disorder is probably one that's most familiar to all of us. So this is that idea of like you like have this inflated ego and sense of self, right? Exaggerated ideas of self-importance. So really just preoccupied with like, I am the best. Like I'm going to talk about all of my accomplishments and successes. Right? This kind of manifests in that idea of like being arrogant and cocky. So yeah, it's just this idea of like, yeah, I am God's gift to the world a little bit. So those are those. Again, really tied in with emotions and attention and impulsivity. Cluster C, like I said, main thing is focus on anxiety. So there's dependent personality disorder, in which this is because you have a fear of abandonment. You have this excessive need of being taken care of, right? You're very dependent on others. So you're going to engage in really submissive and clingy type behavior because you have that fear of abandonment. You're really latching on and being dependent of others and not wanting to do things independently. Avoidant personality disorder. So this is where you feel those feelings of inadequacy and inferiority, so that you are less than, that you're not good enough. You're very self-conscious and just have a really like, poor self concept and self-esteem issues. This might lead to extreme shyness. You're going to be really like sensitive to criticism more than what the average person would be. And because of all these things, because you feel inadequate, because you are self-conscious, etc., you're going to avoid social situations because of these feelings. And then there's obsessive compulsive personality disorder, So again, interesting because we have OCD and then we have OCD personality disorder. And this is a preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, control. So some of those, again, different like obsessions that you see with OCD in terms of the everything being in order, being in control of things, and that perfectionism of, again, that feeling of needing to be in control, right? So what you are doing, I will go ahead and show you what you're going to be doing on mod 8.3 with these different disorders now that you have all the knowledge of them. Okay, so here's what you're doing for diagnosis scenarios. First, I will say be sensitive to others. You never know what someone's going through, and obviously some of these symptoms, hearing about them, might be personal to people and be harder to read for some than others. If this is something that really makes you uncomfortable, like it's too personal, just email me, let me know, and I can come up with an alternative assignment for you. But this is good practice. So I did put a trigger warning on scenario 1 because it does bring up some things to do with self-harm. But yeah, again, just be sensitive to others in your group as you're going through this. So my suggestion for doing this is, read through the scenarios, document their symptoms. The only disorders that are fair game are ones we've covered. So I'm not going to put some obscure personality disorder as one of the scenarios that we haven't talked about. So it's only things that we have discussed in class. So, read through the symptoms that they're displaying, kind of narrow down maybe like 2 different disorders you think it could be, and then go to the DSM and you can get a more in-depth, list of the symptoms. And I really want you to be using the DSM because this is good practice. So let's say you narrowed it down to bipolar disorder. You can type in here, bipolar. You'll see it's on page 123. Really using Control F is easy because you don't want to have to, go through all of these things. So you can scroll down to 123 and find those. Let's go back here. Hold on. My computer is being very slow. Oh my gosh, if it wants to work. Okay, here we go. We're loading a little bit. Maybe. There we go. Bipolar and related disorders. So you can see here's the diagnostic criteria, right? It's going to describe more in depth of what a manic episode looks like, etc. So this can help you provide a better diagnosis. So that's what you are doing. And you'll have more time to work on this tomorrow if needed. All right. If you have any questions, email me. I'll be around. See you guys.